Hey, what's going on, everybody? You are listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. I'm your host, Cliff, and today I have two special guests joining us. I have Dr. Lance Hulme, Professor of Music Theory at North Carolina Central University, and I have Professor Clara O'Brien, Professor of Vocal Performance at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, my alma mater. And both are the founders of Carte. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks.
Hi.
Thanks, Cliff. Great to be
I
here.
Great to be here.
I'm super excited to have you guys on the show. I'm really excited to have this conversation as well. Really quick, before I introduce the topics, as I always do, I want to take and quickly shout out followers on social media and all of our listeners. And if you're listening and you don't already follow us, be sure to check us out on Instagram and Twitter at sane_show. That's sane, SANE _show. And then you can find us on Facebook, The Sane Show. Again, on Facebook, that is The Sane Show. So today we're going to have a conversation about fusion of music. We're also going to have a conversation about supporting the arts. And then following that, we're going to have an interview with both of you so that we can learn more about you guys, the things that you do, and then all the fun and exciting things that go along with that. So let's go ahead and hop right into it with fusion of music. So the conversation I had with you guys, the first go around really had my mind going. And for me, when we talk about fusion of music across genres, it never gets old for me. Most that know me know that smooth jazz, fusion jazz are my favorite genres. When I think about what you guys are doing with a la carte, I think that really excited me because of, again, we're talking about fusion of music. And when I think about the fusion of music, it goes across genres, not only genres, but cultures and across geographic regions as well. And that's what makes it so exciting because, especially to do that, you have to have a great appreciation for various genres of music to even do something like that. So I just wanted to hand it over to you guys and get your thoughts on when we talk about fusion of music and why is it so unique and just everything that goes with that when we talk about the fusion of music across genres and cultures and geographical regions.
Well, I would start by asserting that majority of musicians are not bound to think in categories. We don't tend to see ourselves in a certain sort of rigid category of what we do. Instead, we're always exploring. Being an artist is exploring. Especially for me as a composer, all art is a matter of reaching out and seeing what's out there to assimilate into the language I write. As a performer, the same thing. It's looking for what is out there that is in somehow going to inform me, make me a larger musician. Music not being necessarily something that's encapsulated in within the parameters, let's say, of a genre, style, epic, or culture. It naturally seeps over. It's just part of the nature of being a musician. You're constantly curious. You're constantly interested in what's happening beyond that. And especially when it comes to what we're doing, which is presenting music to a public that may not know these various types of music. It's a matter of bringing that this new fresh thing or this new idea to them to delight them with expanding their worldview when it comes to music, their oral palette, to bring it out more, to completely absorb what this interconnected world gives us, which is it's abounding. It's, of course, music is what we do best. Arts are what we do the best. So they're the best of us. Let's put it that way. They're what we export. Let's say that with the least damage to others, as it were.
So I just want to be clear on what kind of fusion we're actually talking about. There's fusion where styles actually mix and together and make a separate style. Like, jazz fusion is a fusion of various pop and jazz. And what we do is mostly juxtaposition of various styles and genres, because that goes to the heart of what a la carte is about and how it came about, is that we love so many types of music, and we were thinking, how can we find a venue for them? This won't fit on a classical recital or a typical, classical music concert. So how do we do this? We stopped trying to fit them together at a certain point and just said, we're just going to do it all together,
Yeah.
like a collage of styles.
Yeah, loving the jumble, as it were, loving the messiness of it. That being one of the exciting things about it. It's messy. It's like life.
Yeah,
Right.
so we
Go ahead.
and we've really enjoyed bringing this variety of cultures, not only for our own sake, but and we have enjoyed that too. But watching people's eyes, light up when you bring a Chinese gusheng player or something, and never heard that before, and it just opens worlds for them as well, and so it almost feels like a mission sometimes, for us.
Ambassadors of music, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking about this. Just came to mind. I was listening to a song that was done in collaboration between Skip Marley, who is Bob Marley's
Right.
grandson, and then her, who recently became one of the prominent R&B artists of my generation. And I'm listening to the song, and I remember I texted one of my best friends who is really big into reggae, and I was talking to him about how they took the R&B sound and the reggae sound and really made something cool. And I especially you talk about being like ambassadors, right? I'm listening to the song, and I said, for people that may not really be into reggae, but they hear that song that's an R&B song, or it could be a reggae song to some people that has that fusion sound. It could be a way for people to get into reggae that may not be as into reggae. So, when we talk about fusion of music, like I think when you talk about being an ambassador, I think that's what it does, right? You're like you're introducing people to something that they might not have really been exposed to, because that is exactly what the Rippingtons have done to me, because I've listened to them, and now through hearing their various songs on their various different projects, and which have been influenced by different cultures outside of the US, it has helped me to go and explore other genres that I may not have been exposed to, but because I listened to someone who has taken it and done something awesome with it, and I put it upon myself, well, let me go check this out, or let me go hear this, like, because I've heard that sound before. Like, I love Japanese music, like the stuff that you would hear. It makes me think about a dojo, or being you're meditating, like that kind of stuff. So
Well, actually, it even works on the creative process that way. For me as a composer, and for Clara as a performer, you just mentioned Japanese music. My exploration of hearing Japanese music informed me enormously in my compositional life. That was a vital part to understand, not necessarily that I was going to incorporate Japanese principles, but that the principle that what was going on in my creativity was resonating and clarified through my encounter with Japanese music. It became very clear to me the idea of centering around an important sound rather than directly approaching it, always alluding to it rather than going directly to it. And the other one that I was thinking about is, I sent you that video of a piece I wrote for Clara, and trumpeter Chris Gecker, who many people might know is one of the world-class trumpeters. In this piece, it is, if you listen to this piece, you're hearing harmonium trumpet, you're hearing sounds that are not really associated necessarily with my classical composition, but with my acquaintance as a jazz pianist with jazz, and somewhere in the middle there. It's creating there a real fusion. And then I think Clara's performance also, you hear the way she's singing, it is much more, it's less operatic, and less, it moves in another direction, and that fusion creates then a new space, hopefully.
That's really one of the fun things about singing modern music too, is that there really isn't a precedent, especially if you're premiering a piece. You've got carte blanche to do whatever you want, pretty much, and to interpret it the way you want. So you're really setting the standard for others to follow, and that's exciting in itself. But back to a la carte, sometimes it's not so much always that we say, okay, we love jazz, we're going to get a jazz group on there, but sometimes it works backwards. Like, for example, at my school, there's a doctoral student from Libya who plays the oud. And I had never heard this instrument. And we found out about this. And so we contacted him. We said, you're going to be on our show. What do you have? Show us what you do with your oud. So he played us some traditional pieces and sang for us a little bit. And we were just blown away. And then he found a song for me to sing, too. And he coached me on my pronunciation and everything. So in that case, it was a kind of fusion because I don't really have the right kind of native pop voice for that. But that was really, really fun and really opened some doors for us. So
that reminds me, he's going to be on our March 15th concert this
awesome.
year. And this is a very interesting piece because it's a piece where he's going to do taskim, which is appropriate at Ramadan. That's a piece that's played at Ramadan during the meditation sessions before you go into the mosque, and then afterwards for Ramadan. But in addition, we're doing a piece by a student of mine, a former student. He's Israeli. He lives in Israel right now. He's a jazz pianist over there. He's having a nice career. We asked him to send us what he had. He had this 11th century Sephardic Lament of Loss of Jerusalem by a Sephardic Jew, and that he had written in a jazz form, and then he incorporated oud into that. So we have this cross current going on then, bringing together not only the musics of somebody from Libya, and then the traditions of Israel, but also jazz, and it's a classically orchestrated piece, and all that coming together to create something that I don't think exists in any other space like that. All kind of mushed together wonderfully. I said, like the mess of life, we're all a mix, and and that is the healthiness of it. That's it.
So I guess in that case, we do have both kinds of fusion going on in this particular concert.
Yeah, this particular concert, we're doing the one coming up on December 5th. We will be doing one piece from it's a traditional Hanukkah piece, but otherwise we're doing Christmas music from all over the place, including Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So we're really kind of going in all sorts of different directions in this one. And again, we didn't necessarily set out to, it wasn't like a political agenda. That is not really what's going on. Especially I don't think it's going on with many musicians in general, the kind of a political agenda or sort of an overt agenda. It's internal. It's what naturally occurs as a creative and expressive individual. You're always searching out for more. You're always looking for the next thing that's going to make your artistic life more enriched and more meaningful and more present.
And I've been really impressed with how open the audiences are. I thought they might balk at, some of the more popular things. I guess it's just my mindset as a classical musician. But for example, one of our recent concerts, we did a really cerebral piece by George Crumb, which is also
a living composer.
So yeah, also a bit of theatrics going on in this piece. But I mean, it's pretty dry. And I was very concerned that they were just going to stand up and walk out. Like, what is this stuff? I don't get this. But they were absolutely spellbound. And, I just had such respect for them coming with an open mind and absorbing this type of music and maybe not understanding it even, but being completely open to it.
And then the flip side, a couple concerts back, we did Songs to Aging Children Come by Joni Mitchell with Oboe d'amore, which is a Baroque oboe, special, pretty, something like a tenor oboe. And again, the audience, it was with guitar and piano and two voices, and the audience, who might have been more oriented towards a classical concert, were very open to that and really enjoyed that performance, because again, it's less to do with the genre or the sort of an overt fusion. It's this the whole idea of exploration. What's next? I can't wait for what's next.
I also think we undersell our audiences sometimes.
Oh, yes.
Even in classical, there's a festival here in Greensboro, the Eastern Music Festival, that comes every summer. And they stick to pretty traditional programming. But what interests me is how much of the audience is young people, and also the pieces they react to. And so it's crazier ones, the Shostakovich and the really big Mahler pieces and anything that's sort of quasi-modern. Those are the ones that they really, really love. And I just wish we could trust our audiences more and really give them a palette of what's out there, because I think the response would be surprising.
All right, we're back. We're going to now have a conversation about supporting the arts. This is something that is very important to me. It is also a very important topic. because we oftentimes have discussions about the arts here in the States. And one of the things I've learned from my conversation with you guys is that we don't ever really, or at least I don't ever really think about how we compare to other countries when it comes to supporting the arts. And I was just having a conversation with actually my previous guest about just the importance of the arts and those skills that creatives have, whether it be in entertainment, whether it be a visual artist or media, whatever you have it, but helping me realize how those skills transfer outside of the business. But again, just speaking to the greater importance of the arts in general, and that it is important that we support it because, again, oftentimes the arts are overlooked as far as the value that they bring to the individuals that are in the arts, and again how those skills are very much applicable outside of the arts. So want to have a conversation with you guys as far as the importance of supporting the arts, again, especially when you were talking about how France is very supportive of the arts within their own country. So if you could help me enlighten the listeners as far as the importance of the arts and supporting it.
Well, the first thing I would say, I think we have to be careful to understand the relationship between money and the arts. There isn't a one-to-one relationship. Now, this is sometimes overseen because so much of our arts comes through the media now that it becomes that the metric of what makes art good is whether it sells or not. And that is sometimes, a good metaphor, sometimes not. I mean, for example, Igor Stravinsky made virtually no money on many of his major works in terms of real money, enough to make by, but no big mega bucks. On the other hand, Maurice Ravel, his piece Bolero, which is really basically just an arrangement, it made him a rich man. He was already rich, but it made him richer. I mean, there is no direct connection. And then we also have to realize that popular music or entertainment music is part of the capitalist model. It's part of the world in where you buy this music, and not in general, the arts historically aren't bought that way. They aren't a consumer product. It's not thought that way. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. They're not a consumer product. It just means it is. So when we start, thinking about this, do we support the arts? We have to decide, are we talking about supporting the arts that need support, or is that they need support some sort of denigration of their quality because people don't go out and buy them? It makes it a little harder to talk about this in a political standpoint because obviously anything making money is going to have more influence one way or the other.
Right. So it's really difficult to approach the arts on the business model. And it's just absolutely not a quantifiable form of expression or, even of, anything material. It takes a long time to actually develop as a musician, in which time one generally doesn't see any direct profit. Somebody's got to fund that, and people have to be prepared to spend that amount of time to even arrive at a point where they might be making a profit. If we looked up some of these numbers, I know like France spends billions, like $3.5 billion on the arts.
Yearly.
Yeah, as opposed to our, 146 million.
That was the budget for the arts this year.
And you can compare the sizes of the countries there too, So, we really are a profit-based society to a large extent, and people want to see something for their investment, and it just doesn't work that way in a direct way with the arts. It takes time. It takes, I tell my students, 10 years of dedicated practice to be able to control your voice and consider yourself ready to be a professional.
Well, to the flip side of that, too. Yeah. I mean, you look at, for example, the blues. Now, some of the greatest blues musicians, I have a friend who showed me a film, and I wish I could find this film, where somebody just took a camera, and this is I think it's in the early 60s, and wandered around Mississippi and recorded these guys who were singing the blues on their porches. And the artistic quality of that is just, I don't think I understood the blues before that. I really don't think I could even come close to understanding that. On the other hand, those guys were sharecroppers, and they were not making a cent on their music. So to use, again, that profit model is bad. It tends to skew things. It tends to skew things towards what is easily consumed, what's available, what can be exploited to some extent. And so funding for the arts, I think, through other models is kind of evens the playing field in many ways. You might think of that. The things that that aren't successful. I don't know if you know who the composer Mussorgsky was. Very famous Russian composer. His famous opera Boris Godunov is one of the things that's in the repertoire. This piece was only performed on a benefit in his lifetime. It was a gala concert benefit. That's the only way he could get it done. And he was a famous man at the time because he was a member of the Russian aristocracy. So the funding is necessary. And also, I think this is when a little more what you're getting at. The funding has to be a little bit blind. It has to trust that the artist is going to use that money in a way to develop their own unique vision, not necessarily impose that vision on the artist. Not say we have these stipulations. We see you have a value, you've demonstrated a value of where you're headed. Now we're giving you money and see where you go.
Right. It's investing in exploration. And I see this impatient in my students as well. I mean, I had it too when I was young. You want to be able to do it right now. And it just doesn't work that way, folks, unfortunately.
You made me think about something, especially because we're in a pandemic. And one of the things that came to mind, especially when we talk about the exploration, and I just can see countless people, even my own mother, many of my friends who have tapped into their creative side because they're home. And so I'm just thinking about like, wow, like all of these programs that had already been in place for people who want to tap into their creative side but may not have had the proper support. And I'm just thinking about how you have all these people now in this pandemic who are all at home, who all need something to do, who are realizing that they have creative potential. And because I'll tell you, my mother started painting vases, and I have one, love it. And I'm like, I'm just like, where did this come from? And I'm just like that with everybody else, but it's just like, wow. And so now it's got me thinking about like it would be so awesome if there was some kind of support system just to support these people that are now tapping into their creative side and being able to just help them with whatever they aspire to do with it.
Oh, you're making a really good point here in that, again, we're putting the model on this of to be a successful artist means that you are making your living at it, that you are in some way, it is your entire focus. And again, this is a mistake. We're all creative. We're all creative, and we all have that potential in us. That's just, again, part of the nature of human beings. And when we solely focus that on people who wish to be professionals, we are excluding the majority of us. Music making isn't that way in almost any culture in the world, for example. In almost any other culture, any indigenous culture or any culture which is not directly affected by sort of the capitalist model, music making occurs from top to bottom, from little children all the way up to the professionals, and it's a spectrum. Everybody participates at some level, and creativity is that way, the same way. I mean, I am a professional composer. I get paid, and I work in an environment where those pieces are performed for a large public. But I know countless people who a creative process simply makes their lives better. Just makes them a better person, makes them happier, makes them more satisfied.
Yeah, I think the whole Suzuki school, which is a school that starts with really young kids and teaches them instrument of their choice. I think it was Suzuki who said, music is to ennoble the soul, and the type of thinking that is necessary to be a musician is something you take with you in anything you do in your life. Really stimulates your brain in a different way, and also different areas of the brain. So it's about the person, even if they never touch the instrument again. Just having learned how to manipulate the strings or whatever it is, if you're playing the violin, and read the music and be expressive, it's activating all the parts of your brain at one time.
Yeah. Well, another analogy outside of music would be storytelling. Storytelling, everybody's got a story they need to tell, they want to tell, something to express it that way. A novelist, it does it, in a way where that's his entire her entire focus. A poet does that in a way which is in a way that captures language to do that. But each of us have that story. Each of us have our own stories.
Sorry, and education, I think, is really the key, and that's where it really needs to start, either in homes or in schools. Not necessarily make everybody a classical musician, because heaven knows we've got enough of those, but to give young students a language in which they can express themselves. And this is how we become expressive. This is how we tap into our expressivity, by having some kind of language to express it. And you can't, it's really hard if you don't know how to read music, you don't know how to play any kind of instrument. Some people have that innately and they can pick it up, but I don't think that most of us have that. I think we do need to have those hard and fast skills, because once we have those, we can take it in any direction we want. And I think that's really a gift to give to anyone.
No, that that is very true. My brain is really going right now. I'm just I mean, I'm thinking about so much. You know, when you talk about music and storytelling, like I just think about indigenous cultures, and I mean, and this is why I'm such a big fan of Coca-Cola and their brand strategy, because one of the things that they recognize, and I think probably one of the very few companies that recognizes that storytelling is at the heart of civilization. You know, that is how information is passed, and that is how, or, you know, passed along, conveyed, whatever. You know, I think about even in their campaign strategies where they dump millions of dollars into, you know, doing these entertainment marketing campaigns. But just the whole idea of, because it's the creative part, right? It's the exciting stuff. It's not always about the dollar. Like, yes, they're trying to promote their product and their brand, but they're speaking largely to the culture as well through whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah, and imagine when that's not about selling beverage, but instead about sharing
Right.
who we really are as people, and finding the commonalities and finding the differences and exploring them and celebrating them.
Absolutely. And the thread that runs through music and through all these various cultures is human expression. And no matter, what period of music you're talking about or what style of music you're talking about, it's all based on that. And that hasn't changed. That will never change, because that's what we're made of. It's just various ways of expressing those universal feelings that we all have.
Yeah, it's actually true. I don't know. In many cultures, the word for music and dance are the same, and almost every culture, dance, music, and story are bound together in the culture. These things are our original language. Long before we could articulate a cry of joy, we could sing one. Long before we could, speak to a child, we could croon a baby to sleep. Long before we could express our agony with words, we could express it with a lament. This is our language. And these things all come together. Language, dance, music, all come together is touching the core of us.
All right, now for our final segment. I've really been enjoying you guys so far. I'm going to go ahead and fire. I'm going to go ahead and fire off with some questions so that we can learn more about you guys, get some more of your thoughts and all the exciting things that go along with that. So I'm going to go ahead and fire off with this first question. When most people hear classical, they think traditional, stuffy, only able to be done in so many ways. What are some misconceptions surrounding classical music?
I think the biggest one is not understanding that emotional thread is present in all classical music of every era. The trick is understanding the syntax in which it is presented. And that takes a little work and a little openness of mind. I think if you take the time to look at it, you're going to see that those emotions are there. I tell my students this all the time because I teach voice, and so I give my students a song, let's say a Schumann song. He was a middle romantic composer. And so they're standing there singing this, and they're worried about their technique, and they look stiff as a board. And so I talk to them about what's going on in the song, and show them that these people were real, these emotions are real, and that they need to respond to them in a similar way. So, I think sometimes we get so locked up in technique that we forget the emotional side of classical music, or we don't understand how it's being expressed. In terms of being stiff and stuffy, I think that plays into it a lot. But the other thing is that you bring your own emotions and your own interpretation to music when you perform it. And in that way, I think it becomes very personal. So we just need to understand how these emotions are being expressed.
Well, I would go a little bit further. I would say that even that label we're giving, classical, it's imposed upon us as artists. We don't have that label. We don't feel that way. I don't know a single musician who thinks that their musical world's made up of a set of of repertoire, that's just what they do. They don't do anything else. They do it perfectly this way each time. It's just not how we think. We don't think in terms of borders. We think the opposite. If anything, I think we're the ultimate cultural raiders in that sense, because everything is drawn into what we do. Everything is drawn in, and the borders are non-existent. When you think of, say, the classical music, you're thinking what we're really talking about is the repertoire from the 19th and 18th century that's played by orchestral musicians and in concert halls. Well, at the time that was written, there was no such thing as that. It didn't exist, and the only reason we have it that way is because the only way you can market it anymore is to put it into a box and define it. And believe me, the musicians never feel that way. It's not contained. It's the ultimate uncontained experience. Being a performer or a musician, you are always reaching out. You're always reaching, actually in both directions. You're reaching back and you're reaching forward at the same time, all the time. And also, in all fairness to what we do, because it does take a tremendous amount of training. Clara talks about a decade. That'd be true, but for many of us, it's more like 20 years of training to get where we do. We have steeped ourselves in this tradition. We are sort of permeated. We're pickled in it almost. And so it isn't necessarily the sense of borders, it's what's exuding out of us. It's the other direction. It's coming out of us that way because we have completely absorbed it. We have been able to step into what is really in our culture, a tradition that stretches back to Roman times, or at least to medieval times. At least, we're thinking the orchestral tradition, not to mention the other traditions that have joined that since then to come into what we are these days. And you are sort of like, your sense of self is different that way. You're not projecting necessarily you or the separate genre. It's you are part of a movement forward. It's like being part of a wave. I don't know if you've ever surfed. It's like surfing. That's the best. The wave takes you and you go with it, and that's how it feels.
I like the way you think. I really
like
do.
surfing.
You really gave me something to digest. So, and I do agree with you certainly. My next question, as arts educators, can anyone learn some type of way to express themselves musically? And why is it difficult for some people to discover how to?
Well, I think a lot of that goes back to having a language to express oneself. In some cases, as I said, some people can pick up music by ear, but others aren't able to do that. And so they actually need to be educated enough to be able to find a way to express themselves, to understand how to read music or how to play the piano. Doesn't have to be a concert pianist or anything, but some way to understand how to formulate the thoughts that are in their mind and
I think you really picked up on something there, because what's missing, the missing element here, again, is not where we're at. We should be the end of this process of finding a way to express yourself musically. This should be starting when you're a child. This is how it happens in almost every other culture. When you are able to stand, you start to dance and sing. You just do. That's part of what you do in almost every culture in the world. And everybody who has a child knows that, you dance and sing. But we don't foster that with the development of our children today. We're not fostering it in the schools. I mean, I'm a privileged white guy. I came from a suburban school. It had 2 high school jazz bands, 2 high school bands, an orchestra, several choirs. We put on musicals every year. How many people who live, say, in downtown Durham get that chance? It's not there for them. So they're the only thing they have left is the passive acceptance of hearing music and the church, if they can sing in choir. That's about it.
I've noticed this. I encourage in my studio, and we do at UNCG, students to sing music outside of the canon, the classical canon. So I tell my students, if you want to do a musical theater piece or you have a jazz piece you're working on, go and bring it into your studio, work on it with you. And you can't believe how their eyes light up, like you let them out of prison or something, because it's something that they relate to. They've heard musical theater or whatever since they were kids, and they have a real emotional connection to that. I do that because I want them to be able to bring that freedom into everything they do, not just musical theater, but also into the classics. Nobody says it has to be, strict and, distanced. That's just not true.
This actually brings up in terms of I teach composition as well, and especially private students. And when I teach that, I listen to what the student brings to me first, their first expressive qualities, and I look for what's nascent inside there. And I think of an example years ago. I had a student. He came in, and I said, "Well, bring something something new you want to show me that it's artistic." So he brought in this thing where he had taken what's called destructive composing. He'd taken old reel-to-reel tapes and scratched them of Frank Merriweather narrated stories, and then mixed that with a broken Casio that played some notes kind of wrong. It didn't really work. And he brought it to me, and he clearly wanted me to start yelling at him. That was the whole point. He wanted me to say, we got to take all your. And I looked at this and I said, the problem with this piece is it isn't nearly annoying enough. Let's make this so I'm just ready to throttle you by the end of this. And I had him. And we worked on that. And then from then on, when we worked together, he'd give me a nascent idea. And I'd say, no, okay, here's the model where you're kind of headed. This will resonate with you. If you use that, listen to it, develop it, that will foster where you as an individual are headed. And I'm not only speaking about creativity in terms of creating, writing, but this applies across the board. The same thing with a good singer, I'm sure it's the same. Certainly as a pianist, it's the same. You have to look at the technique that's there and develop and build upon that, not by contradicting it, but by finding what works and making it work better.
Yeah, it's important to, I think, meet the student where they are and begin from there rather than superimposing your idea of music on them.
But I always come back to the same point that we should be at the tail end of this. This should be happening to kids, to children, in a way that their lives are full of this creativity, full of exploring, full of expression, and full of opportunities. And we kind of cut ourselves out of the knees this way.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. So we discussed the difference between European and American musicians in terms of versatility. How does that make American musicians unique?
Oh dear.
It's very good.
You probably know, we lived in Europe for many, many years, and so we have a kind of a different perspective that way. Certainly, we can talk about professional music making.
Well, we can just start out by saying that American culture is eclectic. That's who we are. We're a bunch of immigrants from all over the world. The melting pot, as they're fond of saying. So we are, by definition, a collection of different cultures and things. Not as true in some parts of Europe. I mean, certainly every European country has its immigrant communities, but
they're really held separate in many ways.
Often they are, and so that flexibility, that openness, in a lot of ways, is not built into their culture. Not to say that it doesn't happen. Or that musicians are not, willing to cross over. But it's not quite as easy, I think. It's not as natural for them in some cases. Yeah, we should never talk about absolutes in music, because the minute you say something, someone's going to come up with 25 exceptions.
But your point is right. I mean, I think just about every pianist I know personally, especially pianist composers like myself, have had one foot in jazz. I worked as a fusion jazz musician for many years as a keyboardist, and simultaneously with classical music. Now, you don't find many classical musicians in Europe who would have a half a foot into something else. It just isn't quite the thing. I remember I had a premiere of a piece over there at a concert, and it was right before me came this very, very serious German composer, and it was always very serious, very intense. Then came my piece, and the audience was so excited they got up and then danced to classical music. They thought it was so fun, and to me that's just great, because it showed the flexibility of the music itself. But that's a big difference. Americans are just sort of a grab bag. We're curious. We're curio lives. We've picked up things, we put them together, and so we retain that sort of flexibility and And but, the flip side of that, though, again, is that we have in our training at the adult level a level of intensity that makes us masters at many more things than others than in other cultures. We are absolute technical masters.
Well, we do appear flippant a lot of times to certain European cultures who are more serious-minded about the arts. But I don't think we are. I think what Lance said is right, that when we fix on something that we want to be good at, then we really are good at it. We find a way to be experts at it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
but we're trying to have fun all the time too, which makes us look like,
Yeah,
like we're flaky.
that is, I think, the biggest difference is we're just, I don't know, we just seem to be enjoying it more, frankly. We may not, I'm not saying that a lot of times European musicians don't enjoy it, but it just doesn't have that sort of, I guess, flippant air.
They're national personalities too.
Yeah, that's true.
We're talking more on a broad scale here, not on the individual level. But I do think that cultures have personalities as well.
I will say, though, an American musician is always treasured in Europe for their expertise, regardless of genre.
That's good to know. Really quick, my last question to you guys. What structurally are the differences between classical compositions? I don't even want to use that word anymore. I thank you for that too, Lance. But what are the differences between classical compositions, film score compositions, and modern music compositions structurally?
Well, I would say narrative. I would say it's the way that narrative runs through these three types of music. So there's always been, since music was conceived, a narrative running through music, either a story or some kind of harmonic narrative. So that harmony, what I mean by that is that harmonies have implications and it takes you to another harmony or set of harmonies or modulation. And that's all pretty much laid out in the classical canon, starting from the Baroque era, so the 1600s to, I won't say that, to about the turn of the 20th century, when that narrative was disrupted by the modernist trend. And then, just making sense.
Yeah, well, it's getting really wonky, I will say that.
Yeah.
But let me take. May I take a different take on this? You were saying, what's the difference, say, between film music, classical music, and the modern? The musicologist Bruce Nettle has a very good way of thinking about this. He talks about music having it at the core of music. You must understand its affective function. It's affective function, which means what is the music attempting to do? What consciousness is it raising? What altering of behavior is occurring behind this? And when you see then the classical canon, there's a certain set of expectations from that when the music is performed, and in the performing the music, certain things happen. Now, that's going to be very different from music from a living composer. Very different. Or let's take an easier example from film music. Now, film music, the affective function of that is to support both the narrative and the visual narrative. Therefore, it is always subservient to that function. It is functioning to that purpose. And if it is not, then it's interfering with the film. If it's too much. In fact, one of the interesting things you might want to go watch some of the films from the 70s, those gritty ones like The French Connection and so forth, or my favorite, Bullet, and listen to how little music there is and how that changes the nature of the narrative. Because now the music is only used, it's used in a very different function. It's no longer in the foreground, let's say it is with Star Wars, which it is, where it's taking on a majority of the narrative at times. While you're watching spaceships fly around, you're really listening to a musical score.
I think with a classical composition, the musical materials spin out in an organic and natural way to their natural conclusion, depending on the composer's aesthetic. That can't happen in film music, I don't think, in the same way, because there are strictures of how long the scene is. So you got to get to that climactic moment. If your chase scene is, 45 seconds, you got to do it fast. You got to get there.
It doesn't mean it's not really incredible music.
No,
Sometimes it's amazing.
It's just a different process. So your point of departure, I think, is very different.
Nor is it necessarily wrong for music to be subservient to something else. I mean, the music to serve a purpose rather than be the focus of the purpose. In art music, when you're sitting in a concert hall and you're staring at the stage, obviously the purpose there is to totally absorb you. You are to be completely into the cultural experience. Whereas going to, say, a club, and you're listening to the band, I mean, how much are you really paying attention? It's one of the reasons that songs last 3 minutes long is 'cause that's about how long you can dance without necessarily having to take a break. And the music's there. It's important. It's a cohesion for a social experience. So it has a different meaning then.
So, and I touched on modern music and the end of narrative. Good thing you didn't say anything wonky. Right. So what happens around the turn of the century? I'll just make it brief. Is that the narrative is disrupted? So music no longer has to follow any strictures. Really, it becomes about itself. So it becomes kind of art for art's sake, and it doesn't really have to have a particular shape. It doesn't have to have a harmonic framework. It's just sometimes it's just a soundscape or very short kind of composition that doesn't really go anywhere. So music becomes self-reflective at that point.
As does visual art too. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, visual arts are always ahead of music in terms of developing new approaches. It's I think it's your point of departure. How you use narrative or not at all.
Right. Well, I thank you guys for that. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed having you guys on the show. I knew we were going to have an awesome conversation. So, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come on the SANE Show.
Thanks, Cliff. It's been great. Delightful. Great for us.
Yeah. And really quick, if you could let the listeners know where they can find information about a la carte. I want them to be able to stay on top of that and what you guys have going on as well.
Okay, well, the best place would be our website, www.alcgreensboro.com, www.alcgreensboro.com. That lists our concert schedule. It's got lots of media on it for you to see what former concerts are like. That would be the best. We do have a Twitter account, and that's ALC Greensboro as well.
Instagram.
And Instagram. Yeah, Instagram account as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on Facebook as well, FB. If you just would search engine ALC Greensboro, you'll find us right away.
Okay, good. So listeners, you heard it. We have a rewind button for a reason. So write it down, check them out. They make really great music too. I've listened to it. So you won't be disappointed, especially if you are like me and you appreciate all music. So, but yes. Thank you guys again.
It's delightful. A lot of fun.
Appreciate it. You guys continue to like, share, and subscribe to the SANE Show. And thank you guys, listeners, for continuing to listening and support the show. Again, you are listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. And until next time, we're out.